December 1944. The frozen earth outside the village of Noval trembled beneath the weight of German armor, and Panther crews began sending reports that sounded almost impossible. American tanks seemed to appear straight out of the mist, fire once with surgical precision into a Panther's vulnerable flank, then melt back into the fog before a turret could even begin to answer. Moments later, the nightmare repeated from another direction entirely, leaving German gunners twisting in confusion as they searched for targets that no longer existed. Intelligence officers rushed urgent messages to headquarters, convinced they were facing an entire American armored division near Noval, yet the truth was far more unsettling. The Americans had only a small number of tank destroyers, machines weighing just 18 tons, protected by armor so thin it could not survive a single solid hit. Yet the Germans found themselves unable to land that hit, because the vehicle hunting them was the fastest tracked fighting machine of the Second World War, and on that icy morning near Bastogne, speed itself had become a weapon. For years, the German war industry had forged tanks that inspired dread across every battlefield. Titans like the Tiger and the Panther carried guns capable of tearing apart Allied armor from distances exceeding a mile, but hidden within their immense strength was a weakness engineers never fully solved. Their turrets depended heavily on power drawn from the main engine, meaning rotation speed was tied directly to engine output. The Tiger I used a hydraulic traverse linked to its gearbox, allowing a full rotation in roughly 60 seconds at high revolutions, yet tanks rarely fought while racing their engines. In combat, engines idled or crawled forward cautiously, and under those conditions a Tiger turret might require as long as 4 minutes to complete a circle. If the hydraulics failed, the crew faced an exhausting alternative, spinning a hand wheel 720 times just to rotate once. The Panther improved upon this design, yet even it carried limitations that could not be ignored. At combat idle, turning the turret a mere 90 degrees demanded 15 to 20 seconds, and against the right opponent, that delay was not inconvenient, it was fatal. 1941, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Davis Bruce assumed command of the Tank Destroyer Tactical and Firing Center, tasked with answering a single urgent question: how do you stop German armored thrusts? He immersed himself in blitzkrieg doctrine, dissected engagements where Allied tanks had been defeated, and arrived at a conclusion that challenged nearly every belief surrounding armored warfare. Tank destroyers, he argued, should favor speed rather than heavy protection, striking like a rapier instead of trading blows like a hammer. German tanks carried thick frontal armor and devastating guns, making any head-on confrontation almost suicidal, yet their side armor remained comparatively fragile, and their turrets turned slower than many realized. A swift vehicle could sweep around the flank before a turret aligned, deliver a killing shot into thinner steel, then vanish before nearby tanks could react. Many within the army considered the idea reckless, yet the vehicle was approved anyway, and the crews destined to operate it understood the wager: surrender armor, trust mobility, and believe you could move faster than the enemy could aim. 1942, Buick Motor Division received the contract, assigning the visionary studio led by Harley Earl to shape the machine. The same creative force that would later define the sweeping tail fins of post-war American cars now turned its attention toward building a Predator for the battlefield. What emerged defied convention within the American arsenal. The new vehicle weighed just 18 tons, while a Panther approached 45 and a Tiger nearly 57, a difference achieved by shaving the armor down to the absolute minimum. The frontal hull measured only 13 millimeters thick, while the turret face offered roughly 25 millimeters, enough to deflect rifle fire, yet vulnerable to nearly everything heavier. When crews first studied the specifications, unease spread quickly through the ranks. 13 millimeters felt less like armor and more like exposed skin, prompting dark humor that the steel existed merely to keep the wind out. Inside that hull, protection was an illusion, and concealment became the only real safeguard. Power came from the Wright R975 radial engine, the same aircraft-derived powerhouse used in a Sherman, now pushing a vehicle barely half the weight. The result was breathtaking: a top speed near 55 miles per hour, unmatched by any tracked armored vehicle of the war. They named it the Hellcat, a title that captured both its ferocity and its restless energy. The mathematics alone revealed its advantage, because at 30 miles per hour an M18 could cover 44 feet every second. During the 15 seconds a Panther needed to swing its turret 90 degrees, a Hellcat could shift more than 600 feet laterally. enough distance to remain outside the gun's line while preparing a lethal reply. German gunners faced a brutal dilemma: lead the target and gamble it would hold course, or track it directly and watch shells explode where the vehicle had been seconds earlier. Either choice often resulted in a miss, and while the turret struggled to adjust, that Hellcat crew was already sighting a 76mm round toward vulnerable side armor. Although the M18 possessed a swift turret of its own, the true advantage lay elsewhere. The entire vehicle could relocate faster than an opposing turret could rotate, and within that equation rested the fragile arithmetic of survival. December 1944, the Wehrmacht hurled its remaining strength into the Ardennes offensive, while the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion was attached to the 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne. Their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Clifford Templeton, understood that the coming days would demand constant movement. When German armor from the 2nd Panzer Division threatened the village of Noville north of Bastogne, the battalion rushed forward to reinforce the defense. They joined a mixed formation known as Team de Sobry, led by Major William R. de Sobry, a 26-year-old commander preparing to confront an entire armored division. Fog swallowed the battlefield so completely that clashes erupted at near point-blank range, where the Hellcat's thin armor became a silent death sentence. Yet the Germans still had to score a hit, and inside the open-topped vehicles, tension pressed down as heavily as the winter sky. With no roof overhead, crews endured freezing rain, the threat of snipers, and the constant thunder of combat. Shapes drifting through the mist could resemble a tiger until proven otherwise, forcing men to react within heartbeats. Soon the battalion refined a tactic that would earn lasting notoriety. A Hellcat would sprint toward a street corner in Noville, glimpse a Panther through the haze, fire a single round into its flank, then reverse at full throttle. By the time the German turret clawed around to retaliate, the American destroyer had already vanished behind buildings, darted down narrow alleys, and repositioned for another strike. Minutes later, the same vehicle might erupt from the opposite side of the column, deliver another shot, claim another kill, and disappear again. German crews struggled to maintain awareness, because each attempt to face one attacker exposed them to another. Reports flowing back to divisional headquarters grew increasingly alarmed, describing attacks from every direction by what appeared to be a full armored force. In reality, they were battling a reinforced battalion, a young major, and a scattering of tank destroyers whose greatest armor was speed. Still, speed offered no guarantee of survival. With only 13 millimeters of steel, any penetrating hit usually proved catastrophic. German 75mm shells often punched straight through both sides of the hull, and crews caught in open ground rarely escaped. Misjudge the timing, hesitate for even a moment, or fall victim to simple misfortune, and the consequences were immediate. The open turret meant artillery airbursts or mortar fragments could rain directly onto the men inside, requiring no direct strike to be deadly. It was a swift machine, yet also a cold, exposed grave for anyone who stopped moving. Templeton drove his battalion relentlessly, knowing static defense invited destruction while motion preserved life. Across 19 and 20 December 1944, Team de Sobry and the 705th destroyed more than 30 German tanks around Noville. Though the village ultimately fell under overwhelming pressure, those defenders purchased precious hours for the 101st Airborne to establish the perimeter that would hold Bastogne. Templeton survived the Battle of the Bulge and continued leading his battalion into Germany, yet fate intervened on 1 March 1945, when an artillery shell struck his command post. He never witnessed the victory his doctrine had helped secure. 4 months later, the Hellcat's lethal arithmetic resurfaced on another front. The 805th Tank Destroyer Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Herbert W. Fowler, stood as the only formation in Italy fully equipped with M18s. Crews painted unauthorized black cat emblems on their turrets, a cartoon feline clamping its jaws onto a tank against an orange disc. Ordered to remove the artwork, they quietly refused, embracing the symbol as a declaration of identity while driving some of the most fragile vehicles in the theater. April 1945, the Allies launched their final offensive across Italy, emerging from the grinding passes of the Apennine Mountains into the broad openness of the Po Valley. German forces streamed northward toward the Alps, forming columns of trucks, half-tracks, and tanks in retreat. What followed became known among soldiers as the Rat Race. The flat landscape suited the Hellcat perfectly, offering no hedgerows or dense forests to blunt its speed. Crews found themselves driving parallel to withdrawing German columns rather than trailing them, pulling alongside at 30 miles per hour before unleashing 76mm fire into exposed flanks. German gunners spun their turrets frantically, yet the geometry worked against them, because by the time a gun aligned, the firing Hellcat had already surged 200 yards farther down the line. It resembled a drive-by attack executed on an armored scale, and since the 805th was the only Hellcat battalion in the theater, German intelligence grew deeply perplexed. A black cat reported near Bologna in the morning might surface 50 miles north by afternoon. The pursuit unfolded so rapidly that crews could not even guard prisoners, disarming them and directing them rearward before accelerating once more. Veterans later described the surreal sensation of racing past stunned enemy infantry, wind tearing through the open turret, and the uncanny feeling of participating in a hunt rather than a battle. By war's end, the M18 Hellcat had achieved the highest kill ratio of any American tank or tank destroyer, credited with 526 confirmed kills. Its overall exchange ratio hovered near 2.4 to 1, outperforming the Sherman, rivaling the heavy-hitting M10, and surpassing nearly everything else the Americans fielded. Critics observed that Hellcat crews were elite specialists whose success might have followed them into any vehicle. Historian Stephen Zaloga described the M18 as imperfectly balanced, suggesting its triumph stemmed more from disciplined crews than from engineering alone. Perhaps there was truth in that judgment, yet those men chose their methods deliberately. They embraced speed, flanking maneuvers, and hit-and-run violence because the Hellcat allowed it, while another machine might have forced slower choices with deadlier outcomes. The M18 was retired soon after the war, as tank destroyer doctrine faded and heavily armored main battle tanks took center stage. The cruiser philosophy slipped into history, yet its lesson endured with unmistakable clarity. German tankers could not destroy what they could not track, and 15 seconds of turret traverse stretched into eternity against a vehicle moving 44 feet each second. By conventional standards, Panthers and Tigers remain superior. Thicker armor, larger guns, overwhelming presence. Yet convention never accounted for an 18-ton machine capable of being somewhere else before a turret completed its turn. At Noville, the 705th survived against staggering odds through motion alone, while in the Po Valley, the 805th transformed that same speed into devastation against a retreating army. Both battlefields revealed a single, unshakable truth. In the brutal calculus of armored warfare, speed could be deadlier than steel.